A woman runs through a valley choked with the smell of burning sulfur. Her lungs burn with the heat of it. She is unnamed because she was viewed as unimportant. A piece of collateral damage in the larger, more significant narrative of righteous Lot and his miraculous rescue. It appears in the Old Testament to describe military garrisons stationed in enemy territory. It describes officers deliberately appointed to oversee a kingdom. A Natziv is not a passive architectural column holding up a roof. It is a monument. It is a memorial stationed to bear witness over a specific geography. That route changes everything. When the text says she became a Natziv of salt, it is reframing her entire final moment. She did not just accidentally glance over her shoulder. She stood firm. She stopped running from the pain and chose to bear witness to the annihilation of her home, her neighbors, and the married daughters she had to leave behind in the fire. She watched the walls collapse. She watched the sky burn. She bore the crushing grief of a mother who knows her children are trapped in the flames. The salt is not a random chemical transformation. It is a covenant element of preservation. In the ancient Near East, salt was rubbed into meat to stop decay. It was thrown into the fire of the temple altar to seal a promise. It is the physical manifestation of tears. Lot's wife is not a punchline. She is not a simple warning sign on the highway of obedience. She is a monument. She is the unnamed witness to the devastation of the plains, preserved forever in the element of memory. But if you look closer at the text and at the profound weight of how the Bible handles identity, that assumption begins to fracture. Her anonymity allows her to represent every person who has ever been unable to simply walk away from the destruction of the people they love. She stands firm. The fire eventually burns out. The smoke clears. The monument remains. But the edge of a burning city is not the only place. The text hides a name to reveal a truth. Sometimes, the devastation is much quieter. Sometimes, the famine happens inside the walls of a foreign territory. And the only thing standing between an unnamed mother and starvation is the bottom of an empty clay jar. The ancient world is brutally simple. No husband means no income. No income means no food. No food means death. Poverty is not a social issue in antiquity. It is a ticking clock. In the biblical text, the Hebrew word for widow is almana. It comes from a root word meaning to be unable to speak. The silent one. The one without a voice in the legal gates. The one nobody has to listen to. She has no advocate, no protector, no financial safety net. She is completely invisible to the empire. And in 1 Kings 17, she is not even an Israelite. She lives in Zarephath. This is the region of Sidon. This is the absolute epicenter of Baal worship. The very home territory of Queen Jezebel. It is a land that officially worships the storm god. The authors of the biblical text were obsessed with names. They dedicate entire chapters to rhythmic genealogies. They name the builders of temporary walls, the deity supposedly in charge of rain, agriculture, and fertility. But the sky is like iron. The ground is cracked. The storm god has completely failed. Look at the mechanics of this famine. The grain jar is empty. The oil flask is bone dry. A nameless mother is gathering wood outside the city gates. Just 2 sticks. You can hear them snap in her hands. Enough to build a tiny fire. Enough to bake a final piece of bread. Enough to eat a last meal with her son. And then lie down in the dirt and wait for starvation to finish the job. And Elijah walks into this exact moment. He asks for a cup of water. He asks for a piece of bread. Most people read this as a story about extreme hospitality, a demanding test of radical generosity from a woman who has absolutely nothing left to give. But the text is doing something far more subversive. God does not send the prophet to the widow so she can feed him. He sends the prophet to the widow so he can save her. She scrapes the bottom of the clay bowl. Flour remains. She tilts the heavy jug. Oil flows. She wakes up the next morning. Flour remains. She tilts the jug again. Oil flows. Same miracle. Every single day. The empty jar is not a symbol of her poverty. It is the geography of her deliverance. They name the men who crafted instruments. They name the distant, obscure ancestors of their worst enemies. She is the Almana, the silent one, the unnamed casualty of a regional drought. Yet the God of Israel bypasses every palace and every temple to sustain her. The text refuses to give her a name because her anonymity is the entire point. She represents every person who has reached the absolute bottom of the barrel and prepared for the end. But a bottomless jar of oil is a private miracle. It happens inside a closed house, away from the eyes of the village, in the quiet desperation of a kitchen. What happens when the unnamed woman is not hiding in a house, but desperate, unclean, and bleeding out in the middle of a screaming crowd? The crowd is a crushing weight. Hundreds of bodies press against each other on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Sandals kick up a thick, choking cloud of dust into the midday heat. Elbows dig into ribs as people fight for a glimpse of the rabbi from Nazareth. A synagogue ruler named Jairus has just fallen to his knees, begging Jesus to save his dying daughter. Jairus is a named man, a man with a title, a man with immense public respect. But crawling through the dirt behind him is a woman with no name. She has been bleeding for 12 years. So, when an author who loves names deliberately leaves one off the page, they are not being careless. They are doing something highly calculated. Under the strict Levitical codes of 1st century Judea, her hemorrhage makes her perpetually, ritually impure. That means everything she sits on, every cup she drinks from, and every person she accidentally brushes against in the marketplace becomes unclean. She cannot enter the temple. She cannot participate in the community. She is a ghost living among the breathing. Mark chapter 5, verses 25 through 34, tells us, she has spent all her money on physicians and only grown worse. But the detail that changes how you read this entire desperate encounter is the specific Greek word the author uses for her suffering. The word translated affliction or disease in your English Bible is the Greek mastix. It appears only a handful of times in the New Testament, and its primary definition is not medical. It means a whip. It is the exact word used to describe a Roman scourge, the brutal leather instrument of torture used to flay a prisoner's back. That root changes everything. When you read that she was suffering from a mastix, the text is forcing you to feel the psychological and physical trauma she is carrying. Her condition is not a biological inconvenience. It is a daily, relentless beating. Every morning she wakes up. The isolation strikes her. Every time she has to wash her clothes in exhaustion. The poverty strikes her. For 12 years, her own body has been an instrument of torture. The real question of this narrative isn't why she looked back. It is this: why don't we know who she is? She reaches her hand through the forest of moving legs. Her fingers brush the tzitzit, the ritual fringes hanging from the hem of the rabbi's garment. Instantly, the bleeding stops. The text says she felt in her body that she was freed from her mastix. The beating is finally over, and Jesus stops walking. He could have let her slip away into the dust. He could have allowed her to keep her stolen miracle in the shadows, returning to her life as an anonymous, healed woman. But he turns around in the suffocating heat of the crowd and forces her into the light. He makes her tell the whole truth in front of the very people who have shunned her for over a decade. And then he calls her daughter. He does not give her a proper name, because in this moment, her anonymity is a mirror. She stands for every person who has ever dragged a secret, exhausting pain through a crowd that does not even realize they are dying. This woman secured her miracle by refusing to speak a single word. But what happens when the unnamed woman is not trying to hide from the rabbi, but ends up locked in the longest recorded theological debate of his entire ministry? John builds his gospel with surgical precision. He edits out the parables. He edits out the exorcisms. He constructs his narrative around massive, sweeping theological discourses. And the answer changes how you read every unnamed woman from Genesis to Revelation. When you strip a character of their proper name, he records Jesus debating the religious elite. He records Jesus teaching the inner circle of disciples. But the longest continuous conversation Jesus has in the entire biblical record is not with a priest. It is with an unnamed woman holding a water jar. Read the transcript of John chapter 4. The social tension is thick enough to cut. A Jewish rabbi sits by a limestone well. A Samaritan woman approaches in the blistering heat of the 6th hour. A man speaking to a woman in public. A Jew speaking to a Samaritan. A holy teacher speaking to a social outcast. Every cultural boundary of the ancient world is shattered in a single request for a drink of water. But watch how she fights back. She does not cower. She does not shrink. He asks for water. She questions his social etiquette. He offers living water. She questions his physical capabilities. He exposes her 5 broken marriages. She instantly pivots to a fierce, high-level theological debate about the correct mountain for worship. She is sharp. She is defensive. She is brilliant. She trades verbal blows with the Word made flesh. Most readers focus entirely on her past. They focus on the shame that drove her to the well at the hottest part of the day, when the dust was thickest and the shadows were shortest. They assume she is unnamed because her reputation is ruined. In ancient Hebrew literature, you are not pushing them to the margins. You are transforming them from a historical individual into an archetype. They read her anonymity as a polite cover-up for a scandalous life. But John is doing something far more profound. Her anonymity is not a punishment for her past. It is a representation of her people. She stands in for the entire Samaritan nation, a fractured community, a broken lineage, a people dragging the heavy weight of their history, desperately thirsty for a Messiah who will finally tell them the truth without destroying them in the process. When she finally sees him, she does not just receive a private healing. She becomes an apostle to her own abusers. She drops her heavy clay jar. You can almost hear it hit the dry dirt. She runs back into the city. She becomes the first evangelist. In the Gospel of John, an unnamed woman, armed only with a question, flips an entire city upside down. She leaves a jar by a well to announce a king. But she is not the only unnamed woman to leave a vessel behind. Just days before the cross, another woman is going to walk into a room of angry men holding a sealed flask of alabaster. And what she pours out will force Jesus to make the most astonishing promise in the entire biblical record. The house in Bethany is crowded. It is just 2 days before the Passover. And the air in the room is thick with the smell of. You are forcing the reader to stop looking at the specifics of the person and start looking at the vast, heavy space they occupy in the story. Roasted meat and the tension of a city on the edge of a riot. Men are reclining at a low table in the house of Simon, the leper. They are talking. They are strategizing. They are trying to figure out how this rabbi from Nazareth is going to miraculously overthrow the Roman occupation. An unnamed woman steps into the room. She is holding a sealed flask of alabaster. Inside is pure nard, an exotic luxury import from the Exetet, high mountains of India. It is worth 300 denarii, an entire year of a working man's wages. Locked inside a smooth piece of carved stone, she does not ask for permission to approach the table. She does not wait for an invitation to speak. She simply breaks the neck of the way. Flask. You can hear the sharp crack of the stone snapping. You can smell the heavy, overwhelming scent of the perfume as it pours over his head, running down his hair, soaking into his garments, and pooling on the dirt floor. The room goes completely silent. And then, the anger erupts. The disciples immediately do the math. They see a year of sweat and labor spilled on the floor in 3 seconds. They scold her. They call it a waste. They weaponize their supposed care for the poor to mask their deep offense at her extravagant, uncalculated devotion. But Jesus stops them dead, in their tracks. Leave her alone. He tells the room that she is the only one who actually understands what is about to happen. For chapters, the anonymity is not an erasure. It is a spotlight. God is not ignoring the woman frozen in the ash. Jesus has been warning his disciples that he is going to Jerusalem to die. And for chapters, the named men in his inner circle have ignored, to him, rebuked him, or argued about who gets the best seats in his coming administration. The named disciples are arguing about a throne. The unnamed woman is preparing a body for a tomb. And then, Jesus makes the most astonishing promise in the entire biblical record. He says, "Wherever the gospel is, proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." He promises her an eternal monument. He guarantees that her action will be tethered to the gospel message itself, outlasting the Roman Empire, outlasting the temple in Jerusalem, outlasting time itself. And yet, the author of the Gospel of Mark deliberately refuses to record her name on the parchment. The missing name is not an oversight of history. It is a devastating theological verdict. The author leaves her unnamed to contrast her directly with the men whose names we know perfectly: Peter, who will deny him by a charcoal fire; Judas, who will sell him for the price of a slave; James and John, who will fall asleep in the garden. The named men flee. The unnamed woman stays. She is the final witness. The alabaster shatters. The fragrance fills the house, and the clock begins counting down to the cross. And when you look back across the entirety of the text, ash falls like gray snow against her skin, clinging to the sweat on her face and neck, or the starving widow with the empty jar, or the bleeding woman reaching through a crowd. By withholding their names, from the smoke of Genesis to the perfume of Mark, a staggering picture begins to emerge from the blank spaces. A woman stood in the ash of a burning city and became a monument to the grief of letting go. A royal daughter pulled a basket from the reeds and dismantled an empire without lifting a sword. A girl dropped a tambourine in the dust and stood as an eternal indictment against the violence of men. A starving widow scraped the bottom of an empty jar and outlasted the drought that was supposed to kill her. A bleeding outcast reached through a suffocating crowd and felt 12 years of a Roman scourge end at the hem of a garment. A thirsty woman dropped her clay pot by a well and became the first apostle to a broken city. A grieving woman shattered a flask of alabaster and prepared the King of Heaven for his burial. 7 women, 7 missing names, 1 deliberate spotlight. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the empty jar in Zarephath. The sound of those 2 dry sticks snapping in a mother's hands, gathering just enough wood to bake a final piece of bread. The text removes the boundary between their humanity and yours. They become a mirror. They become the vessel through which, before lying down in the dirt to wait for the end. She did not need a title to be seen by heaven. Her absolute lack of identity in the legal gates of her city was the exact reason the God of Israel bypassed every temple and palace to find her. If you are in a season where you feel completely invisible, where you are carrying a hidden grief, scraping the bottom of your own resources, or dragging a 12-year trauma through a crowd that doesn't even know you are bleeding, this literary pattern is a place to sit. The silence of your current season is not a punishment. The lack of recognition from the people around you is not a sign of divine abandonment. You do not need to construct a monument to yourself for God to know exactly where you are standing. The anonymity is not an erasure. It is the space where the divine meets the desperate. If this revealed something for you today, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even 1 word helps. Share this with someone who feels forgotten by the people around them. And pray for us as we keep digging into these ancient texts. And may the God who has always seen the nameless in the shadows walk with you through your own obscurity, and remind you that your deliverance has never required a title. The deepest theological truths are poured. But to see exactly how this operates, you cannot just look at the theology. You have to step back from the sulfur and the salt and look at the literary environment that produced this text. Because long before the New Testament writers were hiding names to protect the vulnerable, the ancient world was using anonymity as a weapon. In the ancient Near East, history was carved into basalt and granite by men who wanted to be gods. When an Assyrian or Babylonian emperor conquered a territory, their first act of dominance was not taxation, it was defacement. Soldiers took heavy iron chisels to the local monuments, physically scraping away the names of defeated rulers and rival deities from the rock. You can still see these artifacts in museums today, stone pillars where names used to be, now reduced to brutal, blank gouges. Dust fell to the desert floor, leaving only a smooth surface of humiliation. To erase a name in antiquity was to erase a legacy. The ground beneath her leather sandals is shaking, radiating a violent heat from a destruction she was specifically commanded not to look at. It was an execution of memory. This was the cultural air the biblical authors were breathing. Anonymity was a weapon. It was the ultimate violence inflicted upon the powerless by the powerful. But the Hebrew text takes this ancient weapon and flips the blade. In the pages of Scripture, the anonymity of women is not an erasure. It is a spotlight. Scholars have identified hundreds of unnamed women across the Old and New Testaments. Wives, daughters, widows, commoness, queens. In a superficial reading, this looks like the oppressive patriarchy of the ancient world, functioning exactly as expected. Men get the genealogies, and women get the margins. But when you map the narrative structure of these ancient texts, a stunning pattern emerges. When a man is unnamed in the biblical text, he is almost always a prop. A messenger dropping off a letter, a servant holding the reins of a horse. He simply moves the plot from one location to another. But when a woman is unnamed, she is almost always a catalyst. She is the axis upon which the entire theological weight of the chapter turns. By withholding her proper name, the author forces you to identify her entirely by her condition or her action. You cannot categorize her by her father's wealth. She is holding her husband's hand. She is leaving the walls of her city, the rooms she built, the married daughters who refused to leave, her tribal affiliation, or her social standing. You are forced to see only her barrenness, her poverty, her courage, or her grief. The author strips away the labels that the society of the day would have used to dismiss her, leaving only the raw, burning core of her interaction with the divine. Think about how human memory actually functions in moments of deep trauma or miraculous survival. If a stranger pulls you from a burning building, you rarely remember their last name. You remember the grip of their hand on your collar. You remember the smell of smoke on their jacket. The biblical writers understood this cognitive reality perfectly. They knew that naming a character ties them to a specific century, a specific geographical zip code of antiquity, but unnaming them allows them to walk out of the text and into your own life. She becomes universal. This is not an accident of history. It is a highly deliberate literary technique designed to elevate the marginalized to the status of theological giants. And to see this engine operate at full power, you have to look at how an unnamed girl single-handedly dismantled the authority of the most powerful empire on earth. And she did it without picking up a sword. She is outrunning a storm of fire. And then, she stops. She turns around. You probably know what happens next. A judgment falls. A royal procession walks down to the Nile. The morning sun beats against the water. The reeds rustle in the dry wind. The most powerful man on earth has issued a decree. Every Hebrew infant boy must be thrown into this exact river. The water is meant to be a graveyard. Blood mixed with mud. The empire demands a sacrifice. Pharaoh's daughter steps into the river to bathe. The water is cool against her skin. The smell of crushed reeds hangs in the air. She sees a basket caught in the shallows. It bobs against the gentle current. It is carefully coated in black tar and pitch. A tiny, fragile ark holding a desperate secret. She sends her maid to fetch it. She lifts the lid. The sunlight hits the interior. A baby is crying. The text does not give us her name. She is identified only by her relationship to the tyrant. She is simply the daughter of Pharaoh. But in this moment, her anonymity is her greatest weapon. She recognizes the child immediately. The text is blunt. She sees the boy, hears the crying, and knows exactly who he belongs to. She knows the law. She knows her father's decree. She knows the penalty for defying a living God. She pulls the basket from the reeds anyway. This is not gentle charity. It is high treason. She does not ask for permission. She does not consult the royal guard. A command is broken. A pillar of salt is left standing on the edge of a dead sea. She hires the child's own mother to nurse him right under the nose of the empire. She brings a Hebrew infant into the innermost chambers of Egyptian power. She raises the boy who will one day turn that same river into blood. She weaponizes her royal privilege to break the machinery of a genocide. And she does it entirely without a name. History remembers Ramses. History remembers Thutmose. History carves the names of pharaohs into the colossal stones of Karnak and Luxor. But the Hebrew text leaves this woman deliberately nameless, because the specific letters of her name do not matter. Her defiance does. The father builds monuments. The daughter rescues a slave. The father demands a drowning. The daughter demands a son. The river was designed to swallow a generation. Instead, it delivers a deliverer. A nameless woman subverts the supreme authority of the ancient world. She pays for his nursing. She adopts him as her own. She gives him the name Moses. She uses the shadow of the throne to protect the spark that will eventually burn the empire to the ground. The unnamed daughter in the river is a picture of quiet, devastating resistance. But that resistance has a dark, horrifying opposite. Because anonymity is a literary tool that cuts both ways. Sometimes, the missing name is not a shield for the courageous. Sometimes, the missing name is a blinding spotlight placed directly on the violence of men. We have told her story in Sunday schools and sermons for generations as a simple cautionary tale, a lesson in strict obedience. And to feel the weight of that, you have to read the most brutal chapters in the entire biblical record. The Book of Judges is a literary descent into madness. It is the darkest, most violent era in Israel's history. A cyclical nightmare where the moral fabric of a chosen people completely unravels. And as the nation decays, the text employs anonymity, not as a shield for the righteous, but as a glaring spotlight on the victims of male depravity. You are forced to read Judges 11 and Judges 19, the stories of Jephthah's daughter and the Levite's concubine. The authors deliberately withhold their names to make a theological point about what happens when human beings become transactional. In a healthy society, a name is a marker of dignity. It carries the weight of a lineage, a purpose, a divine breath. But when a culture collapses into moral anarchy, the vulnerable are stripped of their humanity. Reduced to bargaining chips and human shields, Jephthah opens his mouth in reckless pride, vowing to sacrifice whatever comes out of his doors in exchange for military victory. His unnamed daughter dances out the house with a tambourine, and the text forces you to hear the sickening thud of that instrument hitting the dirt. A stark warning about the danger of looking back at the life God is trying to pull you out of, when she realizes her father has sold her life for a political win. The smell of victory becomes the scent of betrayal. Generations later, a cowardly Levite pushes his unnamed concubine out a heavy, splintering wooden door to appease a violent mob in Gibeah, leaving her to endure a night of unspeakable terror just to save his own skin. If something about this unflinching, brutal honesty of the biblical text is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So, the writer of Judges forces you to look at the blood on the threshold. The author does not name them because the men in the story did not truly see them, by leaving a blank space where a name should be. The biblical text indicts the entire nation. The missing name is not an oversight by an ancient historian. It is a screaming monument to their suffering. It forces the reader to confront the reality that these atrocities were not isolated incidents happening to specific individuals, but a systemic rot infecting the entire culture. When you read these chapters, the silence of their unnamed identities rings louder than any dialogue. Most people assume her anonymity is just a side effect of the ancient culture. They read the text and assume the text is demanding that you feel the full, horrific weight of what happens when the vulnerable are viewed merely as property. But this literary technique of anonymity isn't just used for quiet defiance or tragic indictment. Sometimes, the missing name is tied directly to a physical transformation that has baffled readers for millennia. To understand how that works, we have to travel back to the edge of the burning city, to the woman standing in the ash. And look at the actual Hebrew word beneath the salt. Genesis chapter 19, verse 26. The sky is tearing open over the valley. The air is thick with the smell of burning sulfur, choking the lungs and blinding the eyes. The ground violently shakes beneath the fleeing family. And somewhere on the road to Zoar, the unnamed wife of Lot stops walking. She turns around, and the English translation tells us she becomes a pillar of salt. For centuries, we have painted this as an instantaneous petrification, a divine lightning strike of judgment turning a disobedient woman into a geological anomaly. We preach it as a simple, cold warning about looking back. But the word translated pillar here is the Hebrew noun natziv. It comes from the root verb natzav, which means to stand firm, to be stationed, to be established.